ownership. And he's someone that has sought advice from bipartisan mayors over the past year in terms of housing proposals. So I'll look forward to engaging with folks like him over the weeks and months ahead in terms of sharing ideas around how to promote home ownership at the local level.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yes, thanks for the presentation, and look forward to seeing you in March, hopefully before the CR in that changes. On the immigration is a big deal across the board, and there's a lot of upcoming possible changes. How does that timeline look as it comes down to the states and the local level? I mean, there's a lot of requests for change, or a lot of changes out there coming, but when would we as a state or a city start seeing some of these changes be federalized?
Yeah, so council member, it's important to understand sort of the functions of both, or the differences between the legislative process and the regulatory process. So we would anticipate quick action from the incoming administration on things that can be accomplished through regulations or executive orders. And so as an example of that, I expect that the U.S. Department of Justice will quickly reinstate grant conditions for any state and local grantees to self-certify compliance with Section 1373 requirements. That was something that was in place during the previous Trump administration. The Biden administration removed that requirement as of April of 2021, but that's something that, again, an incoming administration can quickly reassert that as a condition to receiving federal grants. So that's something that I expect to happen quickly. Other executive actions that we expect, of course, there are rumors swirling about mass deportations. From our understanding, there is potentially a list of about 1.3 million individuals who have been flagged by the current Biden-Harris administration. And we understand that the incoming administration will prioritize those individuals for removal, along with those who are understood to be guilty of felonies and other criminal acts. Of course, now I just want to allude to the fact that we're also monitoring legislative developments over on Capitol Hill. Now, as I indicated before, any legislation to make it through both chambers is going to need to go through the budget reconciliation process in order to avoid needing to clear a 60-vote threshold in the Senate. So that big, massive reconciliation package will likely be sort of the first vehicle that will move and contain any major reforms sought to be enacted by the Congress on immigration policy, although there's already been some votes on other bills, including one today in the House. But obviously, the legislative process is a slower process that we should anticipate will likely have weeks, if not months, to prepare for those changes forthcoming through legislation. Again, I would be more concerned with the early actions that the incoming administration is going to take through regulations, enforcement priorities. Again, we're anticipating that President-elect Trump is going to move away from the Biden-era enforcement priorities that de-emphasize targeting populations that have not been convicted of crimes for being in the country. And so with that, I hope it's a hopeful overview. I would be most concerned, again, around the grant conditions coming back into place very early in the administration.
Just about the, I was kind of surprised to hear you mention the Boise to Vegas line. Do you think that'll still be a priority for this administration, or is that because that funding's already there?
So that funding would be included through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And as of now, there's been a lot of hearsay over the past few weeks, if not months at this point. Thankfully, though, the bipartisan infrastructure law really enjoys some good bipartisan support. And so one other thing I would have to offer is from my conversations with Secretary Buttigieg's staff, they have provided some assurance that Federal Railroad Administration, which oversees the Corridor ID program that's of interest as a potential funding path for the reestablishment of that line, is probably amongst the least political agencies. There's only 4 or 5 political appointees who are at the helm of FRA. Most of it's controlled by career level officials who really look to the utility and the honest to God, cost benefit analysis for any of these projects. And so with that being said, President-elect Trump has actually recently appointed David Fink to become the next Federal Railroad Administrator, and he's someone that comes from industry and has received some applause from folks like the American Public Transportation Association. The CEO of Amtrak, Stephen Gardner, heralded the appointment. So I think it feels like good news. It does not feel like it's a burn the house down situation when it comes to administering those bill programs going forward. My one caveat I would offer is just, I think, in terms of all those involved as project sponsors, just emphasizing public benefit and a very good cost benefit analysis is something that we need to be mindful of going forward when we're making the case.
Okay. Any other questions for Jen? All right, well, thank you so much, Jen. It's good to see you virtually, and I hope to see you soon in March.
We're looking forward to seeing you, and thank you all so much for your time today, as well as your continued public service. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, Angela, back to you. Sorry for the jumping back and forth.
It's not a problem at all. I'm here with my trusted advisor, Kate Bradshaw. Kate oversees our lobby team, and just want to offer my gratitude to her and all of our lobbyists for the work that they do for us in and out of the session. So thank you, Kate. So we're going to switch gears a little bit to what we know is coming during the upcoming session, and these are either items that have gone through interim or that are being communicated by the House and the Senate. So the first is school security, and this is going to be building upon HB 84, which passed in the 2024 legislative session. This requires for all schools, whether public or charter, to have either an SRO officer or a school guardian. And so this bill has a pretty big impact to Salt Lake City, both from our police department standpoint, but then also for our schools here and the safety of our students. And so we're watching this really closely. We've been working, our PD's been fairly heavily engaged in implementation of this bill as it's currently drafted with the school district, and we'll be continuing to further that partnership with the district as we move forward and see changes during the 2025 session. And Kate, feel empowered to chime in at any point if you have anything you want to add. Judicial reform is something that we're expecting from Salt Lake City's perspective. We certainly want to keep an eye on this of potential impacts to our justice court here or our prosecutors. We don't know what the judicial reform package may include, although I think Kate is going to add something here. The speaker was just asked this question, and he laughed and said he wasn't going to answer it. So we don't know what we're going to get as far as judicial reform, but as far as Salt Lake City is concerned, we certainly want to ensure that our justice court stays intact, that we're able to continue offering our community-based programs that the justice court offers.
I was only going to add the color commentary that at the meeting we were at, the question was asked, and
Kate,
the
I'm
speaker,
sorry. Can I get you to turn your microphone on by pressing the green button, please?
It's green.
Thank
How about
you.
if I just talk closer? Anyway, it was a comment on the color commentary from our lunch meeting where the speaker did laugh and declined to answer. So I do think we'll expect something there that.
Do you think that will include redrawing of judicial districts?
I think the legislature has some frustrations broadly with the judiciary related to the amendments that were removed from the ballot. I think the most straightforward way, if they wanted to imply their displeasure at a greater level, would probably be to just remove funding or not fund different requests that are brought forward by the judicial branch globally. That would probably be the easiest and most straightforward. That you could look at some things early on in the session during the base budget process. Those would probably be more painful than just choosing not to fund different growth or inflation requests or, you know, different things like that. But it could go as far as other things.
Have you heard about, because I remember that was a discussion a while ago, or a couple sessions ago, redrawing.
They did have that discussion. I think that proved to be expensive. And so that kind of put them into a study mode and slowed that process down. So I don't know that that's the path they would go if they were trying to address some of their frustrations from issues during last election.
Moving on to the next item, and I talked a little bit about this in my update before, Jen, which is home ownership opportunities for legacy cities. And there's kind of a whole suite of policy that's falling under this category. Anything from changing parking regulations, garage requiring or not requiring a garage, looking at different land use regulations, for example, adopting a density overlay zone. Our concern with those proposals specifically is that they don't undo any of the ordinances that you guys have already passed as a legislative body here in Salt Lake. So we want to preserve the land use requirements that we've put in place that are identified both in Thriving in Place and in Housing SLC, and that have been vetted through our community process here in Salt Lake. And we get a lot of credit at the Capitol for our strong affordable housing initiatives and the legislative work that you and the mayor have done in that space. So a lot happening in the land use realm. The future of Rocky Mountain Power is something that we are keeping a very close eye on, as that will have an impact on our ratepayers here in Salt Lake. That's not necessarily a policy area that we potentially would engage in, but we certainly want to make sure that our ratepayers aren't seeing substantial increases with the potential for the disbandment of Rocky Mountain Power. And then, as I mentioned before, ensuring our ability to look at clean, renewable energy sources, grid resilience, ways that we can improve our air quality, and then preserving the community renewable program. I know, Kate, you work a lot in this space. Do you have anything you want to add there?
Energy policy is clearly going to be a priority for the legislature. You have a couple different systems, from the co-op system to the municipal system to the investor-owned utility system, which is the Rocky Mountain Power system. Senator Scott Sandel, Representative Colin Jack have been designated as the point legislators. So the major legislation will come from those two legislators. Scott Sandel will likely have start the bills that deal with Rocky Mountain Power on the Senate side. And he does have a bill at this point dealing with large customer loads. That's been identified as a pinch point in Rocky's ability to serve new, in particular, data center AI-driven loads. So there's going to be a significant bill there. What exactly is in it and how he plans to address those concerns are still kind of under wraps. So that will be one to watch. And then the other is a bill from Representative Carl Albrecht that would remove the ability for Rocky Mountain Power to have an energy balancing account. There's been some concern by the legislature that what Rocky doesn't achieve in a rate case before the Public Service Commission, they use the energy balancing account. The EBA is the acronym. They use the EBA as an alternative way to still recover some of what they had originally requested. So that bill sits out there as kind of a probably a heavy hammer bill if some of these other reforms that they're looking at don't advance and don't seem to get Rocky Mountain's Power's attention to help engage with the legislature on finding solutions for some of these challenges.
Thanks, Kate. The next is election security. You've probably seen in the media quite a few comments about election reform, both from removing the election office from the lieutenant governor to a standalone office, looking at mail-in ballots. We've already seen several bills around election that we're tracking here in the city. So I think there's going to be a hefty discussion around election and elections and transparency there, especially with some of the things that happened during the November election. Wildland Urban Interface and Wildfire Mitigation, or WUI, we've already seen a bill come out by Representative Snyder that went through November interim committee. This bill looks at insurance requirements for wildland urban interface. There may be requirements for the city to adopt the state wildland urban interface building code. And those are things that, that both our community and neighborhoods and fire department are watching closely, and maybe bringing proposals before you here in this upcoming year. I talked a little bit about data privacy. This is going to be a bill that we're going to see probably for the next few years. And this year, the data privacy bill has a pretty profound impact on municipalities and has quite a bit of contradictory language in it as it relates to GRAMA. And so the city's been heavily engaged in this during the interim. Dave Qualey, the Legislative Affairs Senior City Attorney, has been working closely with the state on advising on data privacy and sits on a data privacy board. And both the Recorder's Office and IMS have been working diligently to get the city into compliance with the requirements around data privacy. It certainly will impact the way that the city council operates from public comments and the planning commission. And so there's a lot to come here. And we're going to, like I said, continue to see changes over the next few years of aligning GRAMA and data privacy. It has a pretty profound impact on our police department and our fire department as well. So this is going to be a pretty big, a really heavy lift for the city to get into compliance there. And we are meeting those deadlines now. They're extended out a few years. So I talked a little bit about land use already. There's already been numerous tax proposals that have been introduced, and they vary from changing property tax, changing sales tax structure. We are anticipating seeing some changes around the transit room tax. So always a whole host of packages around taxes that we'll be watching to ensure that there aren't substantial impacts to the city budget there. Anything you want to add on taxes, Kate?
I think the challenging part for taxes is that the state has a very flat budget this year, and so anything they want to do on tax cuts won't be as big or as sweeping as they've looked at in past years. Representative Christopherson does have a bill that would reduce income tax. He's traditionally opened up a bill file early to make sure that conversation is had. I know that in the meeting we were at where the speaker spoke at lunch, the speaker did reference that as being a priority for the state to continue to reduce income tax, but given their relatively flat budgets, it may be smaller than they've done in past years. The governor has very much signaled he'd like to continue to reduce income tax for people who are receiving Social Security. The legislature has whittled away on that one, going from, initially still taxing Social Security above $30,000 now. If you make below $75,000 from Social Security, you're not paying that tax. The speaker was a little less robust on that as a tax proposal versus the income tax proposal. The governor said he'd like to remove that entirely from Social Security, one of only 8 states that does that. So I think it's likely that at the end of the day, when they get to their final revenue projections, you'll probably see some combination of an income tax cut and something on Social Security as well.
Chair,
Yes.
if I can follow up on that, I was wondering if we have seen or heard anything related to having a broader conversation about issues with the tax income as it currently stands. The legislature has raised it multiple times in terms of issues of imbalance between income tax and the additional revenue that funds the more general space, but I haven't seen any proposals for solutions outside of the amendment that didn't move forward. Have you heard anything?
So it is an interesting space that you speak of, because we went through a multi-year period where the discussion was the imbalance between sales tax and income tax, general fund, and what was the income or the education fund. They pulled back the sales tax on services proposal, then brought forward this proposal that was Amendment A, that then was removed from the ballot. And there hasn't been a great discussion of if they intend to try Amendment A again or do something different. One of the factors, this comes from some discussions I had with the president of the Taxpayers Association, is the narrative that sales tax and income tax were growing at vastly different rates. That story has shifted since the pandemic, and so that narrative that was leading down the path at one point of the sales tax on services to broaden that base. Right now, you're seeing growth more on the sales tax side than the income tax side, so the story is different, and therefore we haven't necessarily seen a rush to place Amendment A back on the ballot, or some version of it that wouldn't maybe require those things. In talking with the Senate chairman of the Rev and Tax Committee, they are interested in budget flexibility, kind of the handcuffs between the two major funds. But he had indicated that he was interested in kind of new ideas rather than the study of, what he kind of termed as the old ideas where they had been with Amendment A and with sales tax on services. So I don't know that they've coalesced around kind of caucus plans on those yet. And so you may see individual legislators throw out some ideas, but it might take a session or two before they really have a comprehensive new plan on what they intend to do, or whether post-pandemic trends are really just trends or just blips.
Yeah. So, Chair, if I can follow up.
Yeah.
So I think not that it's our job at Salt Lake City to be able to figure that out for them, but I do think that it's definitely something that I'm interested in related to next steps, and that interest stems from some pretty core issues at the city in terms of where we are looking for resources related to addressing issues that the state legislature has asked us to address. So whether that is related to the sports, entertainment, and culture district and needs in that area, whether it is looking at, some of the broader conversations around individuals experiencing homelessness. There seems to be a hey, we really would like you to do these things. And then I contrast that with listening to the December EAC discussion, where basically it was reflected that we're at $0 as a state in terms of available revenue to be able to put to any of these additional needs and expenditures. So I guess I highlight that as we move into legislative session, previously, and it's been getting leaner and leaner each year, but previously there has been a surplus to be able to go and advocate for some of those pieces. As the state legislature turns to Salt Lake City and says, these are things that we want you to address, I think making sure that we as a city are reflective that in many ways, those additional needs cost money, and we need to have funding solutions around that, contributions, not just at the state level, but also looking at our own budget as well as, private business partnerships, grants, et cetera. But I think that that's going to be a core issue moving forward if we don't see more revenue opportunities, or at least a balancing act occurring up there.
I think I think we catch what you're sharing, and we'll convey that. They are asking for the city to engage in a number of ways that aren't cheap or free. So we'll make sure that we convey those as we have those policy discussions with them on some of those issues.
Great, and we're almost ready to wrap up, and if you guys have any questions, I already alluded to homelessness and water, and I'll just wrap up with policing and immigration. We've already seen a substantial amount of policing bills come out. I talked a little bit about HB 84 around school security from the 2024 session, but there's quite a bit of legislation already introduced for police. So we'll be watching and working closely with our PD on that. And then the last thing I want to wrap up with is immigration. Yesterday, there was a press event that introduced several concepts. The bills haven't been introduced yet around immigration, and so this will certainly be something that we want to keep a close eye on, and potential impacts to the city or to our residents here. There's been a really big push at the state from the governor and the speaker and president, and just the legislature in general around fentanyl and the state's fentanyl task force. We certainly understand the impact that fentanyl is having here in our community, and so we'll continue working on that and watching that. Organized crime is another one of the bills that has gone through a pretty vetted process over the interim through an organized crime committee. Repeat offenders, criminal penalties, human trafficking, looking at unlicensed drivers, and if police officers pull over somebody that's unlicensed, that we may have to tow their car, using E-Verify for all businesses, looking at property rights and removing individuals from property, adding assistance for English language learners to our school system, adding a 2% fee to foreign wire transfers, and then looking at detention capacity. So just putting this on your radar that immigration will be a really big issue both at the state and federal level. And we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Dugan.
Back to the home ownership part. A couple years ago, one of the requests to the group was, or back up, in the bill, they had some funding, some loans, some support for single-family homes, first-time buyers, but it had to be a new construction. You know, Salt Lake City didn't have a lot of new construction, and so we were always asking for, can we get that for first-time buyers of previously owned homes? And is that getting any traction anymore, or is it kind of dead on arrival as it has been for the last 2 years?
I would say, unfortunately, it's not getting traction on existing construction. I had a meeting with the Senate President just before the holidays and raised it with him. You know, whether there was an opportunity for older cities with existing housing to somehow participate, and that legislation was a signature piece of legislation from the Senate President. He feels very strongly that we have to build more in order to reduce the pressures, and making, in his mind, it is making existing homes more expensive to spend the money there versus continuing to build new. I would say that similar sentiments expressed on the governor's side. I haven't had the opportunity to ask it as directly to the speaker, but two of the three really haven't moved on that point at all.
The state is working on a state housing plan, and I know Steve Waldrop, who's the governor's housing advisor, has spoken quite a bit about understanding the need for legacy cities and home ownership opportunities. So it's very much on his radar, and I know we'll see some policy around that, but I don't know if we'll get that new construction and $450,000 threshold changed. Yeah.
Just, are there any other questions before I had one? Oh, so with the non-passage of expanding the jail beds available, we already had an issue of the state wanting to see more enforcement of homelessness and other crimes. And then we now, because of the results of the national election, that's likely going to implicate more ICE holds and more people who are going to be detained longer in the jail. How is that going to, how are we going to be able to accomplish, how does the state intend to accomplish those things without making the jail bigger?
It's a great question.
As you know, I have a lot of involvement with the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and I happen to know that that question was posed to some of the legislators that were engaged in the press conference yesterday by the current president of the League of Cities and Towns, with that exact concern of space and competing priorities. His report back to me was that he did not receive a satisfactory answer on how they intend to do both of those things with competing interests that will also compete for some very limited space. So that's probably not a satisfactory answer to you, just like it wasn't to him, but that's the report we received based on those discussions as a result of the bills that were announced.
And I don't know if I don't really know about capacity issues as much outside of Salt Lake County. Do you know, is there a lot of jail space in all the other counties?
I don't know that I can speak to that. Go for
Yeah,
it.
I do believe there's some jail space in some of the other counties. I think I've been doing a lot of research on the federal level, and with the previous Trump administration, when we saw mass deportation events, there were temporary ICE detention centers set up. And so I think there's certainly the possibility of something like that being set up in Utah if there are mass deportation events. And I think it's important to note as well that the jail is managed by the county,
Right.
Not by the city. And so we can do, our police officers are out working the streets and enforcing the laws here in Salt Lake City. And so we work with the jail space that we have and the availability there.
Thank you. Certainly the topics of immigration and those that are being discussed, I'm very curious about how they're trying to tackle some of these issues. I'm curious about the implications, and hopefully they understand the many constraints. I was reading about the minimum sentence, and by upping some of that, you're not only targeting those that may be undocumented, you're targeting everybody else, and which, to the point, to your point, Council Chair Warden, the ability of our jails to hold violent offenders, which was in the past a problem because the jails were overcrowded. It seems like we are going back to the same issue back yet again, trying to solve an issue out there with basically trying to kill mosquitoes with bats, and it just makes no sense to me. But I would love to hear how we're shaping this, and we add our views. Certainly, I understand that there is many concerns in our community. I represent an area in North Temple that our police department is constantly working very hard to tackle some of the drug issues and getting thousands and thousands of fentanyl pills probably every week out of the streets. So I'm thankful for our police department's diligence and work on that. But I also worried about the rumors that we should do more with less money and with more restrictions and less tax capacity with bills that happened last year, and cutting more taxes, and then the surprise that by cutting taxes there is less revenue. Just to me, it seems hard to understand. The state is cutting taxes, and then the general consequence of that is usually less revenue. Certainly, it seems like they didn't expect to have that small of a revenue. So I'm hopeful to be able to interact with our legislators and hopefully share the concerns of our community. And hopefully the rhetoric is focused on the issues that are at hand and not so much about groups of people of different ethnicities or backgrounds, and that is what my community tells me that they're worried about, and I'm hoping that if you see things that are taking a strange turn, that I can bring my neighbors to the table and explain to them how important these issues are for them, and humanize the issue in a way that it may be needed in those moments. And I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I guess I'm sharing some of the concerns of my neighbors that are happening a lot these last few days, in the last few months. And certainly some of the bills that I saw seemed interesting, and some of them seemed very worrisome, not only because of how they're going to do that, but also the impact, the monetary impact for the communities and the counties as a whole. And ultimately, a goal is to retain and remove those individuals that are violent from our communities, regardless from their immigration status, right? So I'm thankful for the work that you do, and thank you for everything that you do for us. But I would love to learn more about those issues, and I've been asking about those. And I thank you for flagging those immigration bills that are coming in, because I know that my neighbors are asking about what's happening.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Yes, Councilmember Petro.
Specifically around homelessness, is there any indication that we've learned from our mistakes from the past? I was just a constituent back during Operation Rio Grande, but back then we knew we were 300 beds short, and there was never the effort to go back and re-identify those. They knew they would need to increase funding for providers. They never went back and revisited it. The scattered site model depended on the incentivization and building out of the rest of the system from the state level, and that never happened. I fully contend that either scattered site or centralized can work as long as there's strategy and resourcing adequate to what we're asking to be done. And I'm nervous that we'll be in another position where we inherit a mandate without either adequate strategy or funding, and then be blamed for the subsequent failure or stumbling of it. Is there any appetite? Has any audit been done? I know we do audits a lot.
Yeah, that was a long, big compound question. So take a stab. I think this is such a challenging policy area, and as the state has engaged using the Office of Homeless Services and has dove into how they're going to manage this and looked at different sites and decided they want to make this pivot again. I don't know that it's clear that they have the funding to do centralized as much as they want. That's, I think, become really kind of apparent over the last couple of weeks that, as they needed to move through different steps and timelines approaching the session, that potentially the resources this year are not available to do it in the way they want to do it, given the costs involved. As you've correctly pointed out, they have not fully funded the scatter site model. I don't know that I feel confident heading into the 2025 session that we'll be fully funding pick your model, any model.
Yeah, I think giving credit where credit's due, we have seen a substantial investment in the legislature over the past few years, both in housing and homelessness. And so certainly grateful that they have been investing money in it, but it's never enough, right? We can never put enough money into it. The state can never put enough money into it. I know there's a lot of advocacy for additional funding and an ongoing funding source. And really, I think from Salt Lake's perspective, and the drum I've been banging for the past 5 years is if we keep people in housing, then they won't be unsheltered. And so I'm really hopeful that that can start to penetrate a little bit more of stabilizing our renters and keeping our renters in housing, which is a really big deal in Salt Lake when we have over 50% of our residents here are renters, and more than 50% of those are cost burdened. And both the mayor and you as the legislative body have done a really great job of moving forward policy and budget allocations to support our tenants here in the city, and I would love to see some of that happening at the state level as well. So I think homelessness is going to be a really big topic for us and for the state this year. We do know there'll be changes to mitigation funding that hopefully will help a little bit in that arena, but it's never enough for all the need that's out there right now.
May I have a follow-up on that? I'm also confused about this. We moved from a centralized system to a scatter system of, to answer this issue, of those experiencing homelessness. And then it seems like we are going back to the centralized system. It seems to me that we're insinuating that the system didn't work, that it failed, that now we need a lot more and we need one big one. And I understand that there is efficiencies by centralizing some of the services in one place, but why, are we talking about the pieces that were not funded and they were not implemented on that scatter model that was, they were sold to us about the solution on homelessness for the state of Utah, and who's doing this? Who's talking about what pieces were not funded, and can we start there? It seems like maybe there is a better solution. I'm just telling you as proxy for someone else that no one is caring what I say, but it seems like to me, when I remember years ago when they were talking about the shelters that we have right now in our city and in other cities in the valley, people in the shelter are supposed to be there for a temporary basis, and they were supposed to be moving out. The truth is that they're staying there for months at a time because there is no place to go after that. So no wonder they're always full at 99% for most of the time, so there is not enough beds. So it seems to me that we have not solved the issue, where are they going after? And what does this change of model all of a sudden does to all of those other cities that took on smaller shelters, the MVP in Sandy, or the other communities that they're stepping up to answer this issue that is not only a Salt Lake City issue. What does this do to that? Where we were hoping for years now, trying to get other counties and other cities to do their part, which many of them, to be completely sincere, were not. And what doesn't this undermine that whole idea that everybody should pitch in onto this issue and try to solve this? I'm just, confused about why all of a sudden this other thing is in the garbage. Let's start something new. Not that it's a bad idea in general, but I just want us to is there a way to frame this, or if so, if someone is framing this and to answer these questions that I think are important to me? I don't know what I'm asking, but I guess I'm like frustrated because maybe I don't have all the information that they are using. So, any thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, I think that the existing model does work, and we are seeing people who are in our existing HRCs moving into stabilized housing. We saw pretty profound impact on the not tiny homeville. The shelter site, or the
Micro shelter?
Thank you, micro shelter. I couldn't pull down the name. The micro shelter site, and those individuals having stabilized housing and then being able to transition. I think the Utah Homeless Services Board vote to move to a scattered site, or move more to a centralized campus away from a scattered site. We know that our rates of homelessness across the state are increasing pretty heavily, not just in Utah, but across the country. And you can see a direct causation between housing rates and homelessness rates going up. And so I think even with the campus model, without having, again, keeping people in housing and having affordable housing for people to transition into, we are still going to be in a shortage of beds. And that still will impact the other cities that have stepped up. And we certainly are grateful to Tooele and Sandy and our other partners that have come to the table in ways that we didn't see, 10, 15 years ago. And so I don't know the answer to that question, but I do think that there's a lot of work happening in this space. We have the people at the table that need to be at the table, and we're making progress. But I don't know. Andrew Johnston would probably be the better person to ask about the difference between the scattered and the campus models. He's the senior policy advisor on that.
No, I appreciate that, and I know that he is an expert on that. I just obviously expressing frustration because I think everybody in the city wants a solution. Everybody in the state wants a solution. We all push in the same direction, and we're happy to be partners in any way we can. And I think that we have demonstrated over the years with this administration's work how much of willing partners are, even stepping up, even outside our statutory requirement to do more for our neighbors. But we don't have all the resources to do so, nor the expertise. And so thank you for that. Again, it's a bit of a maybe based on all of these things that we've been listening to a few minutes ago, I'm a little, overwhelmed. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for me? And Kate?
All right. I don't think so. Thank you so much for your work on this and for keeping us updated. And thank you.
Yeah,
answering
thank you
our questions.
for the trust in us. We appreciate it.
Okay, up next we have our informational briefing on the 2024 Comprehensive Water, Wastewater, and Stormwater Rate Study. And so joining us for that, we have Austin Kimmel from the City Council Office, Laura Briefer, Public Utilities Director, and Lisa Tarafelli from Public Utilities Finance Advisor. Thanks. And I even practiced, and I still messed it up. I'm sorry.
Tarafelli.
Thank you, council members. Public Utilities is here to present its comprehensive water, wastewater, and stormwater rate study. The study recommends changes across its water-related utilities to meet operational costs and infrastructure needs. Utility rate studies occur every 5 to 6 years to ensure pricing structures remain appropriate and reflect changing conditions. This study began in March of last year and was conducted by FCS Group, a consulting firm specializing in municipal rate and fee setting. And before turning it over to Public Utilities, I'll note that this is an informational briefing to preview rate adjustments. which are intended to be incorporated into Public Utilities FY26 budget. The public feedback opportunities will occur as part of the Council's annual budget review process. I'll also note that key changes by each utility can be found on page 2 of the staff report. Policy questions can also be found on that page. The department shared some additional information, which I sent to your emails yesterday regarding policy question number 5 about revenue stability. Most notable is how revenues and costs of service by class have been aligned through the rate study process. And with that, I will now turn it over to Director Briefer.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing us this time today. I also want to thank each of you for supporting and considering our public utility rates over the years as we seek to ensure the critical services that we provide, all of that infrastructure and everything is well maintained, that we're investing in our aging infrastructure, including generational infrastructure projects such as treatment plants, and that we can continue to operate to provide clean drinking water and protect our environment, which is the mandate that we have due to federal and state regulations and just the right thing to do. I'm also really grateful for the time many of you have taken to visit our major infrastructure projects, such as the water reclamation facility, and your understanding of the necessity of the work that we do. I think you're all aware that rates are the underpinning of how the city pays for water-related services. That's both the capital and the operational side. Public utilities does not collect property taxes or sales taxes to pay for water. And as you know, we do not rely on the city's general fund for water-related services. We do conduct rate studies every few years. That is the standard practice in our sector. And these studies are also completed pursuant to very well vetted and published rate setting practices in the water sector. I will also say that there is in state statute some of those requirements on water rate setting, water and sewer rate setting that mirrors those standard sector practices as well. There are several changes on our system since the last rate study was conducted in 2019 that prompted us to undertake a comprehensive review, and that comprehensive review updates our cost of service, the class distribution of that cost of service, and the actual design of the rates. These changes include significant investments into some of that generational aging infrastructure that I referred to earlier. We've also had changes in demographic characteristics as our city has grown and our land use has changed. We've also had some sharp reductions in the demand for water, and we are also faced with some changing regulatory requirements that require some additional capital and operational expenditure. Before I turn this over to Jason Mumm and Melanie Hobart, who are our consultants, actually Jason just flew in from Colorado this afternoon to be here today. I wanted to also just highlight a few items that I know might be on your minds and on the minds of some community members surrounding water-related rates. As Austin mentioned, the recommended rate study and rate design that we're proposing and presenting to you today, that is the rate design and structure that we're using as the cost and revenue basis as we develop our fiscal year 2026 budget. So that's being incorporated into the work that we're currently doing on that budget process. Also, the recommendation from the rate study that we'll present to you does not include the temporary stabilization fee that was implemented this year. And the reason why that measure was put into place this year was to give us the opportunity to do a rate study, which takes the better part of the year to do. We've been working on this rate study since March. I also wanted to highlight that we do have a public engagement strategy related to both the rate study and the budget process. And actually that public engagement strategy started during the rate study process, where we convened a rate advisory committee of around 30 different community members with different perspectives and different stakes in water, sewer, and stormwater rates to advise us as we move through the process. Jason is here from the FCS group. As Austin said, they have tremendous experience in municipal utility rate setting, as well as other kind of municipal financial matters. And then Melanie is joining us online. And then we have some key public utilities staff who have been instrumental in working through the rate study process. And that, of course, includes our finance administrator, Lisa Tarfelli. Our project manager for this process is Jacob Jorgensen in the red shirt. And then we have our 2 deputy directors over both the capital and operational sides of the work, and that's Jason Brown and Jesse Stewart. And so, Jason, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. How are the slides going to advance here?
If you just say next slide.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you for having me today. I'm Jason Mumm. I'm a managing principal with FCS Group. Our firm, which has been established in 1988, is 36 years old and one of the oldest continuously operating firms in the country that does these municipal rate studies for utilities. We've performed over 4,000 engagements in our lifetime, and we work almost exclusively in the western United States, the Rocky Mountain region through the Pacific Northwest. Getting kind of a good echo from that. I'm going to move this back just a little bit for me. Okay, that's better. Next slide then. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through an overview of what a rate study involves, and then, but I'm going to very quickly then pivot to what are the results that we came up with here. And then I'll talk a little bit about affordability as we close things out and take a look at a regional bill comparison to give you a sense of where all this stacks up with some of your neighbors and even a couple of utilities that are a little bit outside the region. Next. Okay, the rate study process, the way I like to describe it, is one where we try to figure out how much each individual customer needs to pay in proportion to the total cost of the system. It involves 3 major analytical tasks, each building on the first. And the first one is determining how much total money is going to be needed to make the system perform and run the way that we need it to run. That's called the revenue requirement analysis. The second step in there is called a cost of service analysis, and that determines how much a group of customers needs to pay. For example, a residential class of customers versus a industrial class of customers versus a multifamily class of customers, each of which are differentiated by the ways in which they use the system. And then finally, how much do we charge each one of the customers in those classes? That's the rate design. That's what the end customers end up seeing on their bill. Like I said, each one of these processes builds on the other, so we can't answer the rate design question until we answer the first 2. Next. Okay. So as we're going about that last step in the rate design, we're mindful of a number of factors. One is that we want to achieve the financial objectives of the utilities. Very important outcome is that we attain the correct revenue sufficiency in there. And what the utility needs versus what it wants is a process that we go through with our clients. Quite often, not everybody gets what they want in these settings, but we end up usually getting what's needed in order to run the systems. That's called revenue sufficiency. And it's, in this case, a very important aspect of what we're doing with the study. But there are many other objectives that we're trying to meet when we do rate design. This is a small list that includes a number of factors. You can see we're concerned about fairness and equity. We want to make sure that we allocate these rates and charges in a way that represents factual information about how customers use the system. Economic efficiency relates to things like water conservation and other efficient use of resources. Sustainability and predictability relates to the ability for customers to be able to budget and plan for the utility expenses with the rates that they have in front of them. Clarity is just about the ease of understanding, so that customers can understand what it is they're being charged and why they're being charged those things. Cost allocation is something that we handle with that cost of service allocation, but that's about establishing a rational basis for why the costs are what they are and how they're allocated to different classes. And then the last one here, which is a pretty big emerging topic in the water industry right now, which is affordability. And we're still working on ways in which we can definitively define affordability, but we've defined it here to say that basic utility service should be reasonably affordable to those in need. We'll talk more about affordability towards the end. Let's go to the next one. Now, these slides become a little bit repetitive because, as I said, we're dealing with 3 processes, and they happen to be the same process for each of the 3 utilities. Our report covers this in much more detail than I'm going to go into today, but we'll hit the highlights here, and I'll try to not be too repetitive for you. Let's go ahead and hit the first one here. That revenue requirement component is the first thing we need to understand, and it's a combination of 4 major components. One is our operations and maintenance expenses. You'll see that in the blue bars on this graphic. Another is debt service, is the principal and interest that the utility is paying and expects to pay in the future for its the money that it's borrowed. The third one is what we call cash-funded CIP. That's money that comes directly out of the utility's operational budget and into capital projects. Pays for example, major treatment works that are going on here and investments in the aging infrastructure in the system. And then the last one is a smaller component that accounts for the net changes in fund balance. So if we're increasing the fund balance, this is our cash balance, that's an extra revenue requirement on the system. But when we draw it down and when we use those funds, then it's a credit against our revenue requirements. So we use the fund balance to help kind of modulate and keep the rates in check over time.
Jason, I forgot to, before you started, to mention that if there are questions during the presentation, we'll gladly take them. You don't have to wait till the very end because we're giving a lot of information on this. So,
yeah,
Chair,
absolutely.
can I ask a question?
Yes, Councilmember Young.
Thank you. So my question is actually related to the projections and how they relate to the historical piece. So I appreciate, because we're projecting, obviously, we've started in 2024. But I'm just curious how that relates to maybe like the previous 5 years, because it does seem to follow like almost a linear trend. And is that what we're seeing, and or what other variables are we taking into account to be able to create that trend?
Okay, that's